At the turn of the millennium, London celebrated along with the rest of the world. And one of the ways London celebrated was by splurging loads of money on a massive, naff, poorly thought out dome-shaped museum on the bank of the Thames and filling it with fiberglass hamsters, disturbing anatomical statues, and all manner of other educational goblinry. It was supposed to be like a World's Fair, but most people who went were, safe to say, not wowed by the experience. It was, in fact, so underwhelming that it merited a whole video all to itself. Maybe go watch that one if you want some context. When I visited the Dome, I left with a souvenir eraser, some nightmare fuel, and a vague sense of disappointment. But later on that year, the Dome was visited by some people who had their eyes on a rather better souvenir. They were, in fact, planning a once-in-a-lifetime heist at this once-in-a-millennium attraction, with an idea to steal the Dome's most valuable exhibit, a $200 million diamond. Place your bets now on whether they were successful or not. If you've watched some of my other videos on this channel, you might have some idea how this is going to go, but for the moment, I'll leave it mysterious. This is the story of the unprecedented Millennium Dome diamond heist. In the late 1990s, London gangster Lee Wenham's career was in the doldrums. He'd made a decent living for himself via the lucrative business of selling smuggled cigarettes and ripping off cash machines, but he longed for something more, something bigger, something that would mark him out to his fellow crims as an expert in the field. Lee was a career criminal who wanted to do a career-ending job, something that would allow him to retire not just with a nice nest egg, but with respect. The guy had grown up in a criminal family and had gotten his first taste of the spicy flavour of crime when he stole a JCB aged just 15. He had never considered being anything other than a gangster, but as it turned out, he'd also ended up becoming a father. So his desire to retire wasn't just about doing something cool to brag about to other villains, it was also about leaving behind a life of crime in order to be a better dad. In the year 2000, Lee and some of his pals made a solid go at getting that one last big score that would allow him to bow out with his head held high. Yes, I know that's not how you do a bow, but you know what I mean. In February, they held up a security van in South London that was loaded with around 10 million in cash, and they did so in style. They used a truck with a massive metal spike welded to the back to bust the doors of the armoured car in so they could get at the loot. Being professionals, they even gave the big spike a name: Gertie. Gertie did her job admirably. The van was stopped and the doors were rammed, but that was as far as they got. The cops showed up and Lee and his pals were forced to flee. They scarpered on foot as far as the River Thames before piling into a waiting speedboat and taking off over the water. They hadn't scored a cool 10 mil, but they probably did look quite cool during their getaway. In July, they made a second attempt with the same modus operandi. This time they used a truck loaded with Christmas trees to disguise the giant metal spike. They also added a little special sauce, or perhaps in this case special gravy, in the form of some Frey Bento's steak and kidney pies. For those unfamiliar with this British culinary touchstone, these are part-cooked pies that come in a flat round tin. Crack the lid and chuck one in the oven, or if you're an absolute barbarian, the microwave, and within 10 minutes you'll have a pie that's burned to a crisp on the outside, slimy on the inside, and with a taste that can only be described as food. As delectable as they are, Frey Bento's pies are rarely used in bank robberies. But in this case, the gang found that if you spray painted them and stuck on a few extra bits and bobs, they looked like a pretty convincing landmine. Slapping one of those on the side of an armoured car and brandishing the detonator would be, they thought, a good way to make sure nobody tried to be a hero. And they'd have a snack for after the robbery. Genius. So, their plan was a solid one. But this time the gang were foiled by an irate commuter. They'd used their spiky truck to block traffic so they could get at the armoured car, but one irate Londoner got so tired of the hold-up that he nicked the keys out of their ignition and chucked them down a drain. Londoners will tolerate anything, it seems, except a slight delay. Again, the gang fled, pies in hand, for another jaunt on the speedboat. They had stolen precisely £0 at this stage and were probably actually in the red to the tune of half a dozen pies, some spray paint, and the boat rental. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the police were starting to build a profile on them. The cops were certain it was the same gang, by the way, because of an inscription the thieves had left on the big metal spike. This one read, "Gertie 2. Persistent, aren't we?" Persistent as he was, though, Lee was now also a bit desperate. He had been foiled twice in a row, and his dreams of a last big score were rapidly slipping away from him. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, his criminal pal Ray Betson got in touch to tell him he had to take a trip to the Millennium Dome. Lee doubtless let out a bit of a groan at this news, as did most people when they were told they were going to the Dome, but he might have perked up when Ray Betson, who was something of a criminal mastermind, told him why. There were many different zones in the Dome, and one of them was the money zone. Therein, visitors could marvel at £1 million in cash and one of the most valuable diamonds in the world. The stone, provided by the De Beers Group, was known as the Millennium Star and was worth over $200 million. That's according to De Beers. Personally, I think it's a bit rich to let the company that owns the diamond value it, but whatever. It was basically priceless, but Ray Betson had nevertheless managed to line up a buyer. The opportunity was a golden one. The diamond was on display in the Dome, which was notably almost the exact opposite of Fort Knox. It had massive plexiglass roller doors all round the circumference, flimsy walls, and nice flat concrete floors. The gem was basically just sitting there inside a very fancy tent, and this tent was pitched in the East End of London, historically a hotbed for organised crime. If someone didn't try and steal it, it would be a stain on the honour of any number of London crime dynasties. Now, De Beers was aware of this situation and so had taken some steps to protect the diamond. Most notably, they had enclosed it in a secure concrete vault structure, which was covered in sensors and monitored by at least 3 security guards around the clock, night and day. Within the vault, the diamond itself was displayed behind special security glass that, according to De Beers, would withstand a maniac with an ice axe for at least half an hour. But Ray Betson, Lee Wenham, and the rest of their gang were more organised than a demented man with an ice axe. They were, in fact, a demented gang with a nail gun. An industrial nail gun that was designed to shoot nails through solid steel. They reckoned 4 or 5 shots from that ought to weaken the glass enough that they could then smash it with sledgehammers. So, no worries about the maniac-proof glass. But what about the rest of the security? To help them work out how to tackle this, Lee did some surveillance. This included taking his family along for a day out at the Dome. I imagine being the daughter of a prolific career criminal is tough, but I can't help but feel that multiple visits to the Millennium Dome must have been another level of hardship. Anyhow, while Lee was doing that, Ray Betson got in touch with his wife's girlfriend's brother's sister-in-law's uncle, who happened to work on the security team monitoring the Dome, and extracted some information about when best to strike. Thus, a plan was formed. Here's how it would go. Step 1. Get a JCB, a vehicle chosen not just because it harked back to Lee's first ever crime, but also because it was tough, powerful, and would blend right in because of all the construction in the area around the Dome. Step 2. Bang the JCB through the main gates and then through a set of flimsy plexiglass shutters into the Dome itself. Step 3. Get into the vault. This actually gave the gang pause for a bit because the vault was pretty serious business. In the end, they decided to get inside in the simplest way possible. Go in when the vault was wide open during the day. Yes, there'd be members of the public around to witness the daring daylight robbery, but the Dome being the Dome, there probably wouldn't be too many of them. Which just left step 4. Crack open the case with an industrial nail gun and grab the diamond before heading outside for step 5, escape, how else, but in a speedboat. The traffic in London is terrible after all. They sketched out this plan meticulously from their base at a farm outside the city, and then moved the digger and the speedboat into position the day before they planned to strike. Then, on the 7th of November 2000, They went for it. And at first, things looked good. In they went through the gates, in through the shutters, no problems just yet. They reached the vault without issue, ducked inside, and began nail-gunning the absolute business out of the diamond case. And that was when the police sprung out from hiding. The crooks were trapped inside the very vault they'd come to rob. It was all over in a matter of seconds. They'd been caught. As quickly as it had all gone down, the operation to apprehend them was anything but fleeting from the police's point of view. The Flying Squad, that's the cool 1970s name for the division of the police that do busts and car chases and cool maverick stuff to catch bank robbers, had been working on the case for months. So, where did the crooks go wrong? Well, several places, as it happened. First, the cops had picked up one of their number for drink driving after he, no kidding, drunk drove into the drive of a drinking establishment and then carried on right through the wall. Yes, he drove his car into an actual pub. The police hauled him from the wreckage and recognised him as a notorious East End gangster. Rather than arresting him, they instead released him but popped him under 24-hour surveillance so that they could see what he and his criminal cronies were up to. He led them straight to the farm where Ray Betson and Lee Wenham and the rest of the gang were plotting the Dome heist. Police realised what their target was when Lee went to the Dome on 3 separate visits. They had never heard of anyone going more than once before, and doing so was highly suspicious. The gang must be plotting a job at the Dome, and since everything else in there was basically garbage, it didn't take long for them to deduce that the massive, expensive diamond was their target. The police stepped up the surveillance. Hidden cameras and men in camouflage watched the farm around the clock. It can't have been an easy job hiding out in the wet British woodlands for days at a time watching a farm, but I like to think they consoled themselves that it was still better than a day out at the Dome. After all this surveillance, hilariously, the police credited the gang with a much more sensible plan for lifting the gem, thinking that surely they'd go after the Millennium Star when it was transported through London traffic to Heathrow Airport for a brief loan to an exhibit in Tokyo. On the day of the move, they poured a ton of resources into protecting it, including having a SWAT team in a helicopter following along above, ready to rappel down the moment the gang struck. But the gang didn't strike. Clearly, they were planning to wait until the diamond was back in situ in the Dome and try and take it then. Sensing trouble, the cops had a replica of the gem made and swapped it out. If you went to see the Millennium Star during the months of September or October 2000, I have bad news for you. You were looking at a big old hunk of glass. The gang were none the wiser though. They carried on oblivious. When they moved the digger down to London, the police knew that the job was imminent, and they promptly smuggled hundreds of undercover officers into the Dome, some in disguise and some hidden behind fake walls. When the gang busted in and entered the vault then, all the police had to do was basically slam the door and shout, "You're nicked," or "freeze," or "give it up, sonny," or whatever it is British cops said when apprehending an armed robber at the turn of the millennium. And that was the end of that. A dramatic James Bond-esque armed robbery foiled by a meticulous months-long police operation. The entire gang was apprehended, even the guy waiting outside in a speedboat. They were duly sentenced to between 4 and 15 years on the inside. Ray Betson got 15 but was somehow out again by 2012 because that's when he got arrested for attempting to use another digger to steal a cash machine. He got 13 years for that one. No word on if he's totally given up on the digger thing yet, but hopefully twice is enough to learn his lesson. And Lee Wenham, the man who hoped he would be able to retire on this job? Well, after he served 4 years in prison, it looked like he might have turned his life around. He went straight and began to spread the message that crime doesn't pay. Something he was able to do thanks to a Netflix documentary and a book deal and lots of TV interviews which made the Dome heist sound like the coolest thing ever, and, indeed, did pay. So, that's the story of the Millennium Dome diamond heist, aka the most exciting thing that ever happened at the Millennium Dome. It wasn't successful, of course, but it is a lovely bit of Dome lore that I think helped inject a little excitement into the place's final floundering months. Now excuse me, but I have to go. My Frey Bentos pie has been in the oven for a good 20 minutes now, and it's just about ready to...